"What's a fossil like you doing in a place like this?" The voice was a low growl, thick with cheap beer and unearned arrogance. It belonged to a mountain of a man in a leather vest stitched with the snarling wolf emblem of the road vultures. He stood over the small corner table, his shadow swallowing the old man sitting there. Terry Harmon didn't look up. He was 78 years old. With a constellation of liver spots on his hands and a weariness in his bones that had nothing to do with his age, he slowly brought a glass of water to his lips, his hands steady. The slight tremor that sometimes plagued him was for the moment absent. He was focused on the condensation trailing down the glass, a tiny cold river in the humid, stale air of the Salty Dog Tavern. The bar was a dive in the truest sense of the word. The floor was permanently sticky, the air was a cocktail of spilled whiskey and regret, and the neon beer signs in the window cast a jaundiced, flickering glow on the patrons. It was a place for ghosts, and Terry was just another one, hoping to sit with his memories in peace. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Grandpa." The biker, whose patch identified him as Scab, leaned forward, planting his meaty fists on the table. The wood groaned in protest. "This is our place. We don't like strangers, especially not broken-down old ones." He gestured with his chin toward the cane, leaning against Terry's chair. Terry finished his water, setting the glass down with a soft click. He finally raised his eyes. They were a pale, washed-out blue, but they held a depth that was unsettling. They weren't angry or fearful. They were just observant. They took in Scab, the two other bikers who had flanked him, and the nervous energy rippling through the bar. "I'm not a stranger here," Terry said, his voice a quiet rasp. "I've been coming here longer than that vest of yours has been on your back." Scab chuckled, a dry, ugly sound. "Oh, a real comedian. You got a lot of mouth for a guy who looks one strong breeze away from turning to dust." He deliberately knocked Terry's cane. It clattered to the floor. "You gonna pick that up, or do you need one of your nurses to help you?" His cronies laughed, the sound loud and obnoxious in the suddenly quiet bar. The jukebox, which had been playing a mournful country song, seemed to have fallen silent. Other patrons hunched over their drinks, their gazes fixed on the scuffed tops of their tables, wanting no part of the confrontation. The only person who seemed to be watching was Maria, the bartender. She stood behind the bar, polishing a glass with a little too much force, her knuckles white. Terry Harmon bent down, a slow, pained movement that was a testament to old injuries. His hip protested with a dull ache, and his knee, a road map of surgical scars, sent a sharp signal of complaint up his thigh. He ignored it. Pain was an old companion. He gripped the smooth, worn wood of the cane's handle, his fingers finding their familiar grooves. As he straightened up, the effort was visible, a slight sheen of sweat on his brow. Scab saw the struggle, and his grin widened, revealing a row of stained teeth. This was the weakness he was looking for, the confirmation of his own superiority. He saw a frail, disabled old man, an easy target for an evening's cruel entertainment. He couldn't see the steel underneath the fragile exterior, the discipline forged in crucibles he couldn't possibly imagine. "See? Pathetic," Scab sneered, his voice carrying across the room. "You should be at home in your rocking chair, not taking up space in a real man's bar." "This bar is for anyone who wants a quiet drink," Terry stated, his voice even. He placed the cane deliberately beside his chair again. He wasn't engaging, he was enduring. He had endured far worse than the loud-mouthed posturing of a barroom bully. He had endured the suffocating heat of jungles, the biting cold of high-altitude nights, the terror of ambushes, and the profound, aching loss of brothers. The insults of a man like Scab were like stones thrown into an ocean. They made a small splash and were gone. But Scab wasn't used to being ignored. His frustration began to curdle into genuine anger. He needed a reaction. He needed to prove his dominance, not just to the old man, but to his crew and the rest of the bar. His gaze fell on Terry's simple, worn red shirt. "What are you hiding under that thing, old-timer?" he growled, reaching out. "A bag? A colostomy bag?" His friends snickered. Terry's eyes hardened, just a fraction. A flicker of something cold and dangerous sparked in their blue depths before being extinguished. "Don't," Terry said. The word was not a plea. It was a command, spoken with an authority that felt utterly out of place coming from the frail man in the corner. The quiet command only enraged Scab further. Who was this old man to tell him what to do? In a swift, violent motion, he grabbed the front of Terry's shirt with both hands. "I'll do what I want." With a harsh, tearing sound, the cheap cotton fabric ripped down the middle. Buttons popped and scattered across the sticky floor like discarded teeth. The shirt fell open, exposing the thin, pale chest of an old man. And something else. On his right bicep, faded by decades of sun and age, but still unmistakably clear, was a tattoo. It wasn't a skull or a pinup girl or any of the usual designs. It was an eagle, its wings spread, clutching an anchor, a trident, and a flintlock pistol. A Navy SEAL trident. For a moment, the bar was utterly silent. Scab stared at the ink, his brows furrowed in confusion. He didn't recognize the symbol, but he recognized the aura around it. It felt official. It didn't fit the image of the weak old man he had created in his head. As Scab's fingers brushed against the faded tattoo, the stale air of the bar seemed to dissolve for Terry. The smell of beer and disinfectant was replaced by the scent of salt, sweat, and gun oil. The low murmur of the patrons faded into the rhythmic thrum of a helicopter's rotors. He wasn't in the Salty Dog anymore. He was 20 years old, sitting on an overturned ammo crate in a sweltering tent somewhere in Southeast Asia. A wiry man with a cigarette dangling from his lips was hunched over his arm, a homemade tattoo gun buzzing like an angry hornet. The needle felt like 1,000 tiny stings, a fire tracing a pattern into his skin. He didn't flinch. He looked at the faces of his teammates around him, all of them young, hard, and immortal. They were all getting the same mark, a symbol of a brotherhood forged in secrecy and shared hardship. It was more than ink. It was a covenant, a silent promise to one another that they were part of something bigger, something that the outside world would never understand. It was the price of admission to a very exclusive club, paid for not with money, but with sweat, blood, and a piece of their souls. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving an ache of nostalgia in its wake. Terry was back in the bar, the torn halves of his shirt hanging loose. Scab was still staring at the trident, his drunken mind trying to process what he was seeing. Then he laughed. It was a forced, dismissive sound. "What's that? You get that out of a Cracker Jack box? Trying to pretend you were some kind of big-shot old man?" He poked the tattoo with a grimy finger. "You're no soldier. You're just a sad old man playing make-believe." The public humiliation was complete. Terry's history, his identity, the memory of his fallen brothers was being mocked and degraded by a man who couldn't begin to comprehend its meaning. Behind the bar, Maria had seen enough. The torn shirt, the revealed tattoo, the final desecrating insult. It was a line crossed. Her loyalty to Terry, her quiet, dignified regular, who always asked how her son was doing and never caused a lick of trouble, solidified into a cold, hard resolve. She had always kept a promise to him, a promise made almost 10 years ago when he had first started coming in, looking older and more worn than he should. He had given her a small laminated card with a single phone number on it. "If I'm ever in here and it looks like real trouble," he'd said, his voice low, "and I mean the kind of trouble you can't just call the local police for, you call this number. You tell them my name, Terry Harmon. That's all you have to do." She had tucked it away, thinking it was just the ramblings of an old veteran. She never thought she'd use it. Tonight was different. This was not a simple bar fight. This was a desecration. Her movements were invisible to the bikers, who were still focused on their prey. She slipped into the small, cluttered back office, closing the door until only a crack remained. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a righteous fury. She fumbled in the cash drawer, her fingers finding the cool, smooth edges of the laminated card tucked beneath a stack of ones. She dialed the number on her cell phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. It rang only once before a man answered. His voice was completely calm, professional, and devoid of any emotion. Operations? "Hello, my name is Maria," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm at the Salty Dog Tavern on Route 4. I'm calling about Terry Harmon." There was a fractional pause on the other end. The silence was not one of confusion, but of sudden, intense focus. "Is he okay?" the voice asked, a new edge to its tone. "No, he's not," Maria said, tears welling in her eyes as she heard another burst of laughter from the bar. "There's a group of bikers here. They ripped his shirt. They're mocking him. Please, he told me to call if there was real trouble." "Understood, Maria," the voice said, the calm now laced with something that sounded like cold steel. "We have your location. Help is on the way. Just stay on the line and keep your head down." The line didn't go dead. She could hear muffled but distinct commands being issued in the background. She heard the name Harmon repeated, followed by a phrase that made no sense to her. "Initiate a code trident. Active asset is under duress. I repeat, active asset under duress. Scramble the QRF." Maria had no idea what a code trident was or QRF meant, but she knew with absolute certainty that she had just lit a fuse and the explosion was coming. Miles away, in the sterile, blue-lit quiet of a Naval Special Warfare Command Center, Master Chief Petty Officer Ryan Thompson stood up from his desk so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. The name Terry Harmon had acted like an electric shock. Harmon wasn't just some veteran. He was a legend, a ghost, a man whose file was so heavily redacted it was mostly black ink. He was one of the founding fathers of the modern SEAL teams, a plank owner from the very beginning. "Sir," Thompson said, turning to the watch commander, a young, sharp-eyed lieutenant commander named Evans, "we have a code trident. It's Master Chief Harmon." Commander Evans, who had been reviewing after-action reports, was on his feet instantly. The shift in the room was palpable. The low hum of servers and quiet keystrokes was replaced by a tense, focused silence. Every operator in that room, from the grizzled Master Chief to the youngest intel analyst, knew the name. They had studied his missions at Buds. His tactics were literally written into their training manuals. To them, Terry Harmon was what King Arthur was to a knight. "Location," Evans asked, his voice sharp and clipped as he moved toward the central operations map. "A civilian establishment, the Salty Dog Tavern on Route 4. Thompson relayed the information from Maria's call. "Civilian witness reports he is under physical duress from multiple hostiles, a biker gang." Evans' jaw tightened. The thought of a man like Terry Harmon being manhandled by a pack of common thugs was an insult of the highest order. "Are the locals responding?" "The witness states she hasn't called them. Harmon's standing orders on this contact number were to call us first, sir. He didn't want a local police spectacle." "He's about to get one," Evans said grimly, "but not the kind Harmon might have feared." He turned to the communications officer. "Get me a direct line to the local sheriff's department. Inform them that a Tier 1 asset is in a compromised situation and naval personnel are en route. Tell them to establish a perimeter, but not, under any circumstances, to make entry. This is our situation to handle." He then looked at Thompson. "Master Chief, get the quick reaction force. Full deployment. I want them geared up and wheels turning in 5 minutes." "They're already on their way to the vehicle, sir," Thompson said with a grim smile. Back at the bar, Scab was running out of steam. Terry's refusal to give him the satisfaction of a reaction was infuriating. The old man just stood there, his torn shirt a silent indictment, his gaze unwavering. Scab needed a finale. He needed to win. "All right, that's it. You're done," he snarled, making a decision. He grabbed Terry firmly by his tattooed arm. The old man winced, not from the pressure, but from the indignity. "You're coming with us. We're going to take you for a little ride, teach you some respect." This was the final escalation. The threat was no longer verbal. It was a clear and present danger. He began to haul Terry towards the door. His cronies moved to block any potential escape. Terry didn't fight back. He allowed himself to be pulled, his limp more pronounced, his cane left behind on the floor. He just kept his eyes locked on Scabs, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He had seen the very worst of humanity in the jungles and deserts of the world, but there was a special kind of ugliness in this needless, petty cruelty. Just as they reached the tavern's swinging doors, a low, powerful rumble began to permeate the walls. It wasn't the sound of a passing truck. It was the synchronized hum of multiple high-performance engines growing closer at an alarming rate. Then, silence. The bikers paused, confused. The front of the bar was suddenly bathed in the stark white glare of powerful LED headlights. They weren't the flashing red and blue of police cars. They were steady, cold, and unnervingly bright. The tavern door swung open, but it wasn't a patron leaving or entering. 3 black, immaculate SUVs, the kind used by federal agencies, were parked in a perfect semicircle, blocking the entire front of the building. The doors of all 3 vehicles opened in perfect unison, a feat of practiced precision. 12 men emerged. They were not police officers. They were dressed in crisp navy blue operational uniforms, boots bloused, gear strapped to their chests with an intimidating neatness. They moved with a chilling economy of motion, their faces set like stone, their eyes scanning everything. They fanned out, creating a secure perimeter around the entrance in seconds. Their presence was overwhelming, a silent, disciplined force of nature that made the bikers' loud, leather-clad posturing look like a child's temper tantrum. The last to enter the bar was Lieutenant Commander Evans. He was tall, lean, and carried an aura of absolute command. He didn't look at the bikers. He didn't look at the bartender. His eyes swept the room and locked onto Terry Harmon, who was still in Scab's grasp. Evans walked forward, his boots making no sound on the dusty floor. He stopped directly in front of Scab and Terry. The biker, suddenly confronted with a reality he couldn't comprehend, was frozen, his hands still clamped on Terry's arm. Commander Evans ignored him completely. His focus was solely on the old man with the torn shirt. He brought his heels together with a sharp crack, his back ramrod straight. He raised his hand to his brow in a salute so sharp, so precise it seemed to cut the air. "Master Chief Harmon," Evans said, his voice ringing with a respect that bordered on reverence. "Lieutenant Commander Evans, we received a call. Are you all right, sir?" The bar was so quiet, you could hear a bead of sweat drop from Scab's forehead and hit the floor. His hand fell away from Terry's arm as if it had been burned. "Master Chief, sir?" His mind reeled. Terry raised a weary hand and gave a slow, tired version of a return salute. "I'm fine, Commander. Just a slight misunderstanding." Evans kept his eyes on Terry, but his next words were aimed like a weapon at the bikers. "Master Chief Petty Officer Terry Harmon," he began, his voice dropping to a low, cold monotone. "Enlisted 1961. One of the first men to complete basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. Served with distinction in MACV SOG. 3 tours in Vietnam. Recipient of the Navy Cross for actions during the Tet Offensive, where, after his leg was shattered by shrapnel, he single-handedly held off an enemy platoon, saving his entire wounded fire team." With each word, the bikers seemed to shrink. Their arrogant smirks had melted away, replaced by slack-jawed horror. "He is also the recipient of 2 Silver Stars, 4 Bronze Stars with Valor, and 3 Purple Hearts," Evans continued, his voice unwavering. "This man taught the tactics that soldiers are still using to stay alive today. He has bled more for this country than your entire motorcycle club has drank beer. The tattoo you were mocking is the SEAL Trident. He didn't get it from a Cracker Jack box. He earned it with a lifetime of sacrifice in places you will never see, doing things you could never do, to protect the very freedoms you used to act like fools in a bar." The recitation hung in the air, thick and heavy. Maria was openly weeping behind the bar, a hand clasped over her mouth. The other patrons stared, their eyes wide with awe, finally understanding who they had been sharing a room with all these years. Evans finally turned his gaze to Scab. It was like being pinned by a laser. You put your hands on a living legend of the United States Navy. You tore his shirt. You insulted his service. You have no idea the magnitude of your mistake. Scab was pale, trembling. He looked at Terry, at the quiet, unassuming old man he had tormented. He saw him now not as a weakling, but as something ancient and powerful. It was Terry who broke the silence. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of the commander's words. He looked at Scab, not with anger, but with a deep, profound pity. The uniform, the medals, the stories, they're just things, Terry said, his voice a low rasp. What matters is what you do when no one is looking, the promises you keep. That ink on my arm, he said, gesturing to the trident, it wasn't for you, it was for them, the ones who didn't come home. It's a promise to remember. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the terrified bikers. Respect is something you give freely. You can't beat it out of someone. As he spoke, Terry glanced down at his own leg, the source of his limp and Scab's mockery. For a fleeting second, the bar disappeared again. He was on his back, the Vietnamese mud cool against his skin, the air thick with the smell of cordite and blood. He could feel the blinding white-hot pain where his fibula used to be. He saw the face of his young radio man, pale and bleeding out beside him, and he remembered the surge of adrenaline, the sheer force of will that allowed him to get up, to lay down suppressive fire, to drag his friend to the extraction point, his own leg leaving a crimson trail in the dirt. The limp wasn't a disability, it was a receipt, proof of purchase for another man's life. The wail of a police siren late to the party finally broke the spell. The local deputies arrived to find a scene they couldn't possibly process, a dive bar surrounded by silent professional naval operators and a group of terrified bikers being stared down by an officer who looked like he could kill a man with a glance. The fallout was swift and decisive. The SEALs didn't lay a hand on the bikers, they simply provided witness statements to the now very attentive deputies. Scab and his crew were arrested for assault. Word traveled fast, the Road Vultures National Chapter getting wind that their members had assaulted a Navy SEAL Master Chief, a founding father of the teams no less, unceremoniously kicked the entire chapter out. They were pariahs. Months passed. The Salty Dog was quieter now. Terry still came in for his glass of water, a new flannel shirt buttoned to his chin. One afternoon, as he was leaving, he saw a man sweeping the parking lot of the grocery store next door. It was Scab. He was thinner, his face drawn. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the stoop of a man who had been thoroughly and publicly humbled. Their eyes met across the asphalt. Scab froze, the broom still in his hands. A flicker of fear, then shame crossed his face. He gave a short, jerky nod, a silent, pathetic apology. Terry Harmon looked at him for a long moment. Then he raised his hand and gave a slow, deliberate nod in return, a nod of acknowledgement, a nod of forgiveness. He got into his old pickup truck and drove away, leaving the man to his sweeping and his ghosts. If this story of quiet valor moved you, show your support by hitting the like button, sharing it with a friend who appreciates true heroes, and subscribing to Military Stories for more stories about the unassuming giants who walk among us.